I'm Jessica, the Museum Guide, and today I'm taking you on a tour of some of the most strange, unusual, and downright bizarre graveyards in London. We're going to talk today about London's dead, and more specifically, the most unusual places they reside in the capital. No matter what time of year you're watching, it's always a good time for the macabre. Of course, here in London, there are literally thousands of monuments, churchyards, tombs, and churches celebrating the dead. But today, we'll focus on visiting the strangest of the lot. I always say that my purview as a museum guide stretches to include churches and graveyards, so be sure to watch last year's spooky videos about the most macabre things in London's churches. Remember, I offer private tours of London's graveyards, oddities, and museums, and I would love to show you around. My contact details are below. On our tour today, we'll visit a medieval sex workers' graveyard, a remarkable animal cemetery, an 18th century Jewish cemetery located in an East London university, and a clown's burial site where you were encouraged to dance on the grave. Literally. And that's just to name a few. So get comfortable, load up on sweets, and let's explore the strangest graveyards in London. Our first graveyard today is one of the most tragic places of rest in the country, Crossbones Graveyard, just a stone's throw from Borough Market in southeast London. This is a somber and important place, but it was forgotten for centuries, as it holds the remains of some of society's most maligned and neglected members. It was known as a medieval, quote, single women's cemetery because of its high concentration of sex workers and their children. In this part of London, sex workers were nicknamed Winchester geese, since the Bishop of Winchester controlled the South Bank of London and actually licensed their trade. Yet the church was profiting from prostitution, and it was said to be bitten by a Winchester goose was to contract venereal disease. So they did have an informal blessing from the church to carry out their business, but they were not considered deserving of a proper Christian burial in consecrated ground. We can see some proof here. This rare dish dates to 1590, and it shows three women transforming into geese, surrounded by this kind of vulvic pattern, and the words Winchester geese slip traced across the base, and that was excavated nearby. And it's attributed to Nan the Potter, who was both a potter and a Winchester goose herself. The graveyard was actually in use from the medieval period to 1853. As we'll discuss when we come to Meath Gardens, or the former Victoria Park Cemetery, it wasn't possible to build on London's former graveyards, but this one never had official status, so it was built upon, and it wasn't rediscovered until the 1990s. At that time, archaeologists removed 148 skeletons for study, but they estimate that 15,000 people are buried here. The study of these remains has given us a glimpse into the difficult lives of the poorest of the poor in London throughout the ages. Now, initial impressions that this was a graveyard just for sex workers are overblown. There are a fair few men here as well, and recent scholarship and archaeological survey reveals that it was likely a burial place for the poor in general. Tragically, 40% of the graves contain fetuses or infants up to the age of 1. The site, as you can see, is well looked after and decorated with mementos, ribbons, and memorials. To this day, London's misfits see themselves reflected in the mistreated and abandoned Winchester geese of the past. We owe the stewardship of this site to a dedicated group of volunteers, and in particular to the poet and pagan John Constable, aka John Crow, who championed its preservation and began to, quote, hear an unquiet whispering in his ear that inspired him to write a series of poems and plays published as the Southwark Mysteries. Since that time, there has been a gathering here every Hallowe'en and regular services and events on the 23rd of each month to honor the dead. If you'd like to visit the site at other times, you can access the exterior 24/7 or enter the Memorial Garden Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday between 12 and 2 p.m. Since moving to London more than a decade ago, I've always lived and worked in the East, and I love exploring the strange walking routes that Citymapper suggests. Bunhill Fields is a convenient shortcut from the Barbican to Shoreditch, and I've always loved strolling through this non-conformist cemetery, home to some seriously pudgy squirrels who are mostly fed pret-a-manger sandwiches by city workers.
And this is really one of the most amazing things about London. For many people, myself included, something like Bunhill Row can just be the path that you walk to and from the office.
The name Bunhill Fields derives from Bone Hill, but that name predates this burial ground. It might be due to its use as a burial site since Saxon times, but it's more likely owing to its use as a dumping ground for human bones, more than 1,000 cartloads, which were brought from St. Paul's Charterhouse in 1549 when it was demolished. The bones were used to infill previously unusable marshy fens, which was successful, and 3 windmills were built on this site. So yes, human bones were used as building materials all over London. Just think about that as you walk around. The Bunhill Fields burial ground that we know today was first used during the Great Plague of 1665. Afterwards, it was repurposed as a non-conformist burial ground until 1854, and over the course of nearly 200 years, approximately 123,000 interments are estimated to have taken place. Of course, not all of them would have had markers or gravestones, which really only came into fashion in the 19th century. Today, you can see just over 2,000 monuments across the 4 acres. So Bunhill Fields is an early example of protected, non-denominational grounds, and it was particularly favored by non-conformists. I've said that a few times, and what I mean is Protestants and religious dissenters who did not wish to be buried in Catholic or Anglican churchyards. Now remember, this is a century and a half before the cemetery mania of the early 19th century. For more on that grisly topic, watch my video on the London Necropolis Railway and Brookwood Cemetery, which is also home to many nonconformists. Having a standalone graveyard not affiliated with a church was very unusual in the 17th and 18th centuries, and this gave people who didn't fit neatly into an established religion a burial option. Some notable graves here include John Bunyan, who wrote Pilgrim's Progress. He died in 1688. Daniel Defoe, who wrote Robinson Crusoe and died in 1731. Susanna Wesley died in 1742, known as the Mother of Methodism because of her sons John and Charles Wesley, who founded Methodism. And of course, the poet, mystic, and artist, William Blake, who died in 1827. I'm working on a video about the strangest graves in London, but bear with me as I have a new baby. But I'm definitely going to include this unusual grave, the monument of Dame Mary Page, who died in 1729. The inscription reads, in part, "In 67 months she was tapped 66 times, had taken away 240 gallons of water, without ever repining at her case or ever fearing the operation." When I came across this, I had absolutely no idea what it meant. I assumed that tapped might be referring to bloodletting, but it's actually even stranger. Mary probably had a rare form of dropsy that caused an excessive buildup of fluid around her lungs. The, quote, tapping was therefore draining the fluid away. 240 gallons is the equivalent of 1,100 liters, so that's really a remarkable amount, remarkable enough to inscribe on her grave for fascinated tour guides to come across 300 years later. Just a few steps away, and on my favorite walking route, is a former Quaker burial ground in use from 1661 to 1855, and it's also been known as Bunhill Fields throughout history. It's definitely worth visiting both.
By the way, if you're thinking that Bunhill's looking a little bit overgrown, that's very much intentional. This is a woodland habitat for a lot of birds and small animals, like the fat squirrels. So the grass is left unmown and things are allowed to seed naturally.
The Ilford Pet Cemetery is, by far, the most far-flung graveyard on my tour today, all the way in East London, almost at the Essex border in Ilford, and behind a PDSA veterinary clinic. Here you'll find more than 3,000 family pets and military animals laid to rest, many of them decorated with medals and honors for their service. I'm not ashamed to say that this was the only graveyard I visited that actually made me tear up. Reading the gravestones and learning about these heroic and much-loved cats, dogs, goats, and even pigeons was a melancholy experience, and of course it reminded me of my own dog. The pet cemetery was founded in the 1920s, and fields nearby played host to a dark chapter in history, the British Pet Massacre, which occurred at the beginning of World War II. More than 750,000 pets across the country were killed due to fears of food shortages. It's believed that as many as 500,000 were buried nearby here, and it really is tragic. Within a few months, it became clear that the fear had been overblown and pet owners really regretted what they had done. Sadly, those animals are in unmarked graves, but there are many marked graves here as well, and the cemetery was in use until the mid-1960s, at which time it was mostly abandoned. It became neglected and overgrown, and a lot of the graves were damaged and broken over time. However, it was fully restored in 2007 with a £50,000 grant from the National Lottery, and it was reopened with a grand ceremony that included a pigeon fly past, which did not go as planned because the pigeons got spooked by the crowd and they flew in the opposite direction, and buglers from the Royal Rifle Corps performing the last post. The military animals buried at Ilford include 13 recipients of the Dickon Award, named for animal rights pioneer Maria Dickon. The award was established in 1943 to honor heroic animals. And here you can see Mary of Exeter, a World War II carrier pigeon, Rip, a stray dog who became the first search and rescue dog in the service of England, and many more. You can also see the resting place of Simon, a stray cat who ended up serving aboard the HMS Amethyst in the late 1940s. Simon was actually quite famous. He was known for his prowess killing rats, and he was wounded by gunfire while aboard his ship on the Yangtze River, which killed his commanding officer. Simon was not expected to survive, but he recovered in full, and he returned to killing rats aboard the ship. He received the Blue Cross, the Yangtze Campaign Medal, and the Dickon Medal. He was actually even promoted to Able Sea Cat, and he became so famous that he received heaps of his own fan mail. So much so that Stuart Hett was formally made the ship's cat officer, and he was put in charge of answering Simon's fan mail. I'm not making this up. Amazingly, Lieutenant Commander Hett attended the reopening of the cemetery in 2007 to honor his pal, Simon. The cemetery is dotted with benches and places to sit and relax, taking in the peaceful surroundings and thinking about all the very good boys and very good girls buried here. There's also a more modern memory garden designed by celebrity gardener Bob Flowerdew. What a name! He was destined to be a gardener. In all seriousness, this is such a special and unique place for any animal lover, and it's worth the trek to the middle of nowhere if you like unusual graveyards. Here we are at our fourth unusual graveyard on our tour today, and this is called Meath Gardens.
I used to walk my dog here all the time, and when I noticed this ornate gate, I knew that something more was underneath the surface, and boy was I right.
But just with a little bit of research, I discovered that the archway was not designed for this field. No, it's the former entrance to the now forgotten Victoria Park Cemetery, and the field on which I had been walking my dog was actually one of the largest cemeteries in all of London in the 19th century. You can actually get a feeling for the park's past use if you pay attention. Just look at the way the field undulates and rolls, hinting at the bumpy ground just beneath. Now, some of you may know that we are just a stone's throw away from one of London's so-called Magnificent Seven cemeteries, the gorgeous Tower Hamlets, built in 1841 at a time when London's churchyards were buckling and heaving under the pressure of too many bodies. Back then, cemeteries were a good business, and many savvy businessmen opened their wallets to build massive necropoli. While Tower Hamlets attracted a well-to-do crowd, there was a gap in the market for lower-priced burials, and that's where Victoria Park positioned itself. The land was purchased in 1840 by Charles Butler, later a local MP, and he opened the cemetery in 1842, though the ground was never consecrated. Sadly, both of the chapels, designed by architect Arthur Ashpatel, were allowed to fall into ruin, but the Gothic arched gateway that I often admired was restored in 2017. A notable burial in the cemetery belongs to Bripum Yarraman, also known as King Cole. He was a member of the Australian Aboriginal cricket team in England in 1868, the first representative cricket team to tour England from Australia. Sadly, he died from tuberculosis and pneumonia while here on tour, and he was buried in an unmarked grave in the cemetery. In 1988, the Aboriginal Cricket Association decided to honor him with this commemorative plaque. The cemetery was never a very good business venture, and it declared bankruptcy only 12 years after opening, though it did remain open to burials until 1876. The site was allowed to fall into ruin, regarded as a scandal and disgrace, and was eventually turned into a park, Meath Gardens, in 1894. The Disused Burial Grounds Act of 1884 prevented construction on former burial grounds, rendering this land worthless. During the 34 years that Victoria Park Cemetery was open, a staggering 300,000 people were buried here. I don't think most folks walking their dogs realize just how many souls rest beneath their feet. For number 5 on our tour today, we're at Joseph Grimaldi Park. And like many London parks, this was once a graveyard. It was the burial ground of St. James. And today it's been repurposed for recreation and sport, with a tombstone here and there, of course. That was hard to get used to when I moved to England from Canada. It takes its name from one of the most famous people interred here, Joseph Grimaldi. There is no one more important to the history of clowning than Joseph Grimaldi. This Regency-era titan of entertainment revolutionized the art form, resulting in clowns being given much larger roles in harlequinades, a popular part of pantomimes during which the harlequin and the clown take center stage. And if you want to really experience British culture, come to this country at Christmas time and go see a panto. Grimaldi became so successful that people began to refer to all clowns as Joeys. He originated white face paint for clowns, and his catchphrase, "Here we are again," is actually still common in pantos. He lived just a short hop, skip, and a jump from here on Exmouth Market, and he performed regularly at Sadler's Wells Theatre and Drury Lane. Sadler's Wells is a stone's throw from here as well. Though he achieved great success in his career, his relationship with London theatre owners deteriorated, and he retired in 1823. Like so many other comedic geniuses, Grimaldi struggled with depression. He also dealt with severe physical pain due to the physicality of his clowning performances. His first wife died in childbirth, and his surviving son drank himself to death while Grimaldi was still alive, and he really was the classic sad clown. Now, if we want more clown history in London, do you? Some people do, some people don't, I'm sure. But if we want more clown history, we need to go to the Holy Trinity Church in Dalston, which has traditionally been home to a clown museum and a clown egg register. That's a collection of painted eggs, each depicting a clown's signature makeup look. But the museum and the eggs are not currently on display due to the condition of the building. I did get a chance to see a few of them at a clown history exhibit at the Horse Hospital near Russell Square Station. That said, Holy Trinity Church is still a site of pilgrimage for clowns and clown lovers, and there's even a stained glass window inside featuring Grimaldi. On the first Sunday of February since 1946, the church hosts a special service in honor of Grimaldi and clowns around the world. Clowns attend in full costume and put on a show for the public afterwards. Some of them even continue on to Grimaldi Park to pay their respects to Joseph and carry on a strange tradition. See, Joseph Grimaldi loved making people happy, and he wouldn't have wanted us to be sad. So people attach balloons, streamers, and noisemakers to his grave, and they even take it one step, or two steps, or a do-si-do further. That's because artist Henry Krokatsis designed 2 coffin-shaped inlays and titled the art piece An Invitation to Dance on the Grave, and this also honors musician Charles Dibdin, who died in 1814. As you can see me doing my best Elaine Bennis impersonation here, visitors are invited to dance on these bronze plates, which do make noise. You can dance on Grimaldi's grave. And apparently, if you are very talented, it's possible to play the song Hot Codlins, which Grimaldi himself made famous. But I wasn't so successful.
You already know that I have a lot of fun filming these videos, but that was probably the most fun I've ever had.
For number 6 on our tour, we're here at the Novo Jewish Cemetery. And there's nothing strange about a Jewish cemetery in London. There's been a thriving Jewish population here since the mid-17th century, when Oliver Cromwell opened the borders to Jewish traders from Spain and Portugal. However, what is unusual is that the Novo Jewish Cemetery, one of only two exclusively Sephardic cemeteries left in England, is completely surrounded by the campus of Queen Mary University in Mile End.
If you want to visit Novo Cemetery, you need to come into the campus of St. Mary's University. That's right, the cemetery is at the heart of the school.
Novo, which means new in Portuguese, was originally opened in 1733, but it was preceded by the Velho Cemetery, also in Mile End, in 1657. This one is in the middle of a housing complex and is only open to members of the Jewish community by request. However, there are a number of other disused Jewish cemeteries in the East End, just like this one, steps from Meath Gardens. As Velho Cemetery grew more overcrowded, there was a pressing need for a new burial ground. The first burials took place here in 1733. By 1895, the cemetery was nearly full, and the last burials of adults took place in 1905, with the final children's graves dating to 1918. However, an exceptional final burial was allowed in 1974. John Gervais Lang, who worked at the nearby Beth Holim Home for the Elderly, was allowed to be buried next to his father when he died at the age of 93. Novo Cemetery is really one of those places that you have to see to believe. Every day, thousands of busy medical students go streaming past on elevated walkways designed to protect the cemetery, and just a few feet below them is this fascinating relic of the past. What we can see here is a small percentage of the, quote, newer graves that date to the 1855 extension. The graves from the original 1733 part of the cemetery were cleared, and around 7,000 graves moved to Brentwood in Essex. For more on cemetery relocation, click on the video above to watch my video about the macabre things in London churches, and watch the section on St. Pancras Old Church. Here at Novo, you can see that the gravestones are flat, representing the idea that we are all equal in death, and there's also a wash basin and a cup. This is so that Jewish adherents can practice the custom of washing each hand 3 times, alternating between the right and the left hand after they attend a funeral or visit a graveyard. Some notable burials at Novo include Benjamin Disraeli, the grandfather of the Prime Minister of the same name, and Daniel Mendoza, who was a famous prizefighter in the 1830s. For our final strange graveyard on our tour today, we're visiting Charterhouse Square, and this is really one of my favorite places to bring guests on any tour, especially when talking about the dark and the macabre. This is a 14th century Carthusian monastery that was deconsecrated after it was dissolved by Henry VIII in 1537. Today it houses university classrooms, pensioners' almshousing, and a fantastic museum that just opened last year. Now you may not see a graveyard, but I can assure you that it's here. Walking through this ancient part of Smithfield, you can enjoy the ambience, the historic buildings, and the gardens, but just a few meters beneath your feet lurks a sinister secret. See, after excavations and archaeological surveys took place for the Crossrail project in 2014, archaeologists confirmed something they'd suspected for years: a plague pit dating to the 1348 plague, and further outbreaks in the 14th and 15th centuries. Yersinia pestis rocked through the continent and British Isles, killing up to 60% of the population, a staggering 200 million people in total. Let me know in the comments below if you'd like a video dedicated to the plague here in London's museums. There's a lot of artifacts and interesting exhibits. Here in London, we needed somewhere to dispose of the bodies, and it had to be fast. After excavating and testing the skeletons of 13 men, 3 women, and 2 children, this is now thought to be the second emergency burial ground referenced in historical documents, but until then it had never been found. Now looking at this map, we can actually see plague pits dotted all around Greater London, concentrated in the east and in Soho, which was royal hunting grounds at the time. When you hear the term plague pit, you might think of bodies loaded into a pit with little care or attention to their dignity, but this couldn't be further from the truth. Archaeologists discovered that they are indeed buried in neat rows, and the ground may even have been consecrated. It's estimated that thousands of bodies are in this burial ground, with some even speculating it may be upwards of 70,000, making this the largest plague pit in Europe. Studying these skeletal remains helps historians and archaeologists alike understand what life was like for medieval Londoners. One Londoner in particular is highlighted inside the museum. He's now known as the Charterhouse skeleton, and he resides in a candlelit tomb beneath a pane of glass. Isotope analysis of the skeleton's teeth has since revealed that he was born and grew up in a rural area of East Anglia before moving to London and dying of the bubonic plague. This newly opened museum is fantastic and well worth a visit. I plan to make a walkthrough video, so let me know in the comments what parts of the Charterhouse you're most interested in. I highly recommend a visit to this atmospheric square, and it's the perfect place for us to say farewell on our tour.
Well, that's the end of our tour, and I hope that you'll agree that some of these are really quite off the beaten track, unusual, but also pretty special. Let me know in the comment section below which one you found most interesting, and if you'd like to see other similar tours to this. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you the next time I'm at the museum. Happy Halloween, everybody!